And now we come to our Muppet of the Year for 2019.
Hmm.
And we decided on a Muppet of the Decade, which is magnificent, I think, in this instance.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
2019 was an interesting year for Muppetry. It came in various forms and guises, ranging from back in January, a Muppet who took it very much on the chin and was absolutely open to a really good conversation about how
Mm.
archaeologists think, and that is Neil Ackerman and his
Yeah.
not so ancient Aberdeenshire stone circle. I think he did masterfully there in being open and talking about process and helping people to understand that actually
Yeah.
archaeologists work with evidence, and sometimes the evidence can lead you down the wrong path.
And it's precisely because he was so open and so
Yeah.
wonderfully wry and engaged with the whole thing
Hmm.
that he's actually not the Muppet of the Year, because it's actually a really positive story
Yeah.
in the end,
Yeah.
as well as being a great
Well,
story. And
in many ways, he is the Muppet of the Year because he's probably the most positive Muppet.
yeah,
But he's
yeah.
not the Muppet of the Year.
Yeah, and we should add that actually all the videos where we discuss the various Muppets are up on the
Yeah,
ArchaeoSoup
yeah,
channel, so
yeah,
please look them up if
yeah.
you want to refresh your memory about any of these. But Neil's is worth particularly a look.
I think so. And in that
I
sense,
mean,
but I don't think we need to go through them through each and every one. But we had so the delightful to the relatively harmless. So, for example, people taking selfies on Hadrian's wall, causing damage. Um,
yeah.
the incident of the time traveling Spitfire, where a news agency, I think Sky News, got their timeline horribly wrong.
Well,
On
they had a Spitfire crashing in the First World War, which was really bright.
Yes, it was odd. It was an odd one.
It was up there with the World War II bomber found on the moon.
Yes, yes, which I didn't know about. I learn things all the time doing Muppet of the Month. Um, and also as well, actually, the Hilda the Scottish Neolithic, sorry, Hilda the Neolithic Scottish
Hilda the
Druid
Druid.
from
Yeah.
1,500 years ago. That was one of my favourites as well.
Yeah.
Um, but I suppose uh, this ranged as well to the more malicious Vandals, for example, attacking graves and monuments around the UK. And this was
Yeah.
something that I know that you felt particularly strongly about when we came
Yeah.
to cover that. How do you feel that act of Muppetry, and this is where it is the more serious form of Muppetry. Um, uh, how do you think that fits in terms of the decade that we've just had?
I think it's both emblematic of the decade, and sadly, I think it's emblematic of where we're heading. To refresh people's memory, you haven't had a chance to look at the video yet or don't recall it. A num in the middle of the year, a number of statues in and around London, but also in Glasgow, were vandalised in various ways.
Hmm.
One of them was the memorial to Bomber Command aircrew in London, which was daubed with paint.
Hmm.
Um, and the memorial to British victims of 9/11 was also daubed with paint.
Hmm.
And in the tomb of Karl Marx in Highgate Cemetery was also damaged by a hammer attack. And in fact, they've just announced that there's a new closed circuit television monitoring system been put in place for Karl Marx's tomb to try and hopefully prevent that happening or deter it happening again.
Yeah.
But also a memorial to soldiers killed in the Boer War in Glasgow was also vandalised.
Mm.
And this plays into various political agendas. For example, the Bomber Command campaign has always been controversial on the political left. It was seen as, but it has been seen by some people as a terrorist war crime,
Right.
terrorism and a war crime. Um, the imperial actions in Africa, the Boer War, you can understand again people on, particularly some people on the far left, for example, see that as something that has to be protested. And people might remember the Rhodes Must Fall campaign in Oxford about the bust of
Hmm.
Cecil Rhodes, and also the parallel with the campaign to remove Confederate memorials in the United States as being, somehow leaving them in place condones slavery. Um, and that
What?
is that's a touchstone issue for the alt right in the States. So these things are basically what it comes down to is heritage is now in play as part of extreme political discourse
Mm,
on both the left and the right, and damaging heritage is seen as acceptable. And just as we're recording this, we're still dealing with the fallout of President Trump tweeting the other day that he would target places important to Iranian culture
mm.
if the United States were to attack targets in Iran as part of the current Middle East crisis.
And so
So you have the President of the United States apparently stating that they're planning what is actually a war crime, as has been pointed out by many academics and archaeologists,
and announcing it to the world. I
and
think
announcing it,
I think
and not caring, or,
no,
or actually worse, doing it deliberately to actually wind up
yeah,
the
yeah.
people, which has
Uh,
happened very successfully.
and so really, in that sense, across the board, it would seem that these acts are done for varying, often wildly divergent political reasons. Um,
Yeah.
but they seem to be, and I would posit a little mini connection back to one of the trends that we identified in the past decade. They seem to have their
Mm,
root in this idea of optional histories, and the
mm,
idea that well, actually, at both ends of the spectrum, one that something that is set in stone must stay there forever. For example, the Rose
mhm.
Must Fall campaign. Um,
Yes.
I personally believe that people have a right, and cultures have a right, societies have a right to decide to honour things differently as time progresses.
Hmm.
But then also, secondly, this idea that if you don't agree with something in current political discourse or just everyday discourse, then the person who you disagree with has to be obliterated in some way,
Yeah.
whether that's through trolling or through attacking in various
Yes.
ways. Um, it seems that of all Muppets last year seems to be speaking to a general uh, lack of tolerance for civilized discussion about complex issues, um, which I think
That's
well,
precisely why I've chosen it.
yeah, and hopefully um, we're going to have to rediscover that way of having
Mm.
civilized conversations in the coming decade. Um, Otherwise, who knows what will happen? Because the thing is, I'm not a Marxist. I'm not a Marxist.
Neither
Uh,
am I, amazingly.
no, 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 no. Sorry. The reason why I'm saying that, no, I've got a beard, but I'm not a Marxist. No, no, it but it's undeniable that Karl Marx has formed and shaped a huge part of the society that we live in. The response to his thinking has shaped ideas in socialism, and the counterpoints against those ideas in socialism
Yes,
have
absolutely.
resulted in good and bad things that
Yeah.
can, it's not a simple thing. You can't just say that's wrong, we must obliterate it. And so it feels as though, and the more extreme example that you mentioned there of Donald Trump is that we run the risk of destroying all vestiges of character and ourselves, ironically often in the pursuit of some sort of character purity. It's a strange, it's something that's divorced from sense. And yeah, so I know I'm rabbiting on there, but it's just I struggle with this
Yeah.
a lot. And of course we do, because we're archaeologists and we appreciate the importance of
Mm.
artifacts to tell us about who we are, so of course we're going to struggle with it. So
And,
that
and as archaeologists, we rely on the understanding of the fact that once something is part of the historical discourse, you can't unhappen it.
yes, yeah,
Karl Marx lived. He wrote what he did.
yeah,
Bomber Command did what it did. Whatever you think about it, and it's part of the historical and archaeological record. It doesn't mean we can't have a detailed, a passionate and nuanced conversation about it. We should. We should constantly revisit these areas.
yeah,
We're going to see the same thing in a few weeks' time with the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp,
yeah, yeah.
concentration camp and death camp.
Mm.
So these things are history, but they're also live. And it's what makes what we do so exciting, but it's also what makes what we do sometimes so difficult too.
Well, and as Yeah, and I suppose sorry, you've just clarified something for me there as well. And I suppose a part of what makes it so live and exciting is the potential for discourse and also new discoveries that recontextualize the past and therefore the present, looking back at the past.
Absolutely, yeah,
But
yeah,
also, I guess this current trend to rush to claim ground
yeah,
for whatever reason, usually a political reason these days, or
mm,
identity-based reason. This rush to claim ground is extending back into the past in a way which for people who otherwise would be ardently against, for example, totalitarian regimes,
yeah.
results in totalitarian-like behavior. You know, you ignore which you don't like because it's inconvenient, and that's not what archaeology or history is or should be. Um, Okay, so that's your Muppets of the Year pick, do you think? And
Yeah.
I think I would agree. I think that's probably the most serious, the most Muppet. And in this instance, this isn't a funny Muppet. This is a serious Muppet. Um,
It's very so.
but a slightly more
Which you
amusing.
can't say for the Muppet of the
No,
Decade.
the Muppet of the Decade. Drum roll. Um, we've decided is Cadbury's chocolate, the company who put out incredibly
Not even the Freddo campaign by Cadbury's Chocolate,
well
who are
indeed.
now owned, of course, by the American multinational Kraft.
Yes, indeed, and their incredibly ill thought out campaign, where they essentially encouraged looting of archaeological sites because they didn't bother to consult anyone who knew what they were talking about. You have, I think, behind you a piece of evidence of the crime, don't you?
I have a Cadbury's Freddo crime scene.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Yes,
there's
there we go.
one back there behind me somewhere as
Yeah.
well. There, I think. No,
As our
somewhere
reader
there.
can see, it says Freddo treasures. So the past obviously is all about digging up treasure,
Hmm.
and notwithstanding that, our great mentor Dr. Jones was not in any way a treasure. He always recorded his artifacts
Oh,
and
yes, sorry. Yes,
negotiated their transfer to museums with,
yes,
with indigenous peoples and
yes,
so on.
yes.
Hence, I'm wearing my ironic indie style hat this morning. But yeah, Cadbury's Dairy Milk Freddo campaign, which published a website publishing various places where you might go and investigate and dig up treasure,
Hmm.
most of which were scheduled ancient monuments, one of which was in Ireland, where any kind of treasure hunting would be absolutely illegal. Um, shall I go on? It cited the British Museum, the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and it's still entirely obscure what involvement they had in actually whether advice was given or whether they just got on the back of it because
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
the publicity opportunities
Oh,
that it gave.
history. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm.
history. Yeah.
History.
Yeah. So no, basically, I'm gonna be sweary here. It was probably the biggest and best heritage PR clusterfuck in history. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it was the gift that kept giving, and
It was.
uh, definitely a deserved Muppet of the decade.
Yeah, we should probably spray this gold with a picture of, I don't know, Miss Piggy on top, and present it to the chairperson of Kraft.
Yeah, they would love it. They would love it.
In
Although,
fact, the head of PR at
although
Cadbury's.
to be fair, I have looked into this, and apparently, the ownership is not as straightforward as we thought it was. So there are
Oh,
you'd have
I
to
just
find the
thought it was
parent of the
Kraft.
parent. I think, yeah,
Oh,
it's
sorry.
complicated.
I
But no,
got.
it's fine. It's fine. We'll just parachute. We'll do like a propaganda, drop all over the site. We'll do one in Birmingham, do one in the
Yeah,
US as well. It'll be fine.
yeah.
But actually,
Actually,
also,
I have to say, this is as a good archaeologist, I've actually not excavated this at all. It is still a sealed context,
you haven't
as you can
opened
see.
it.
I haven't
Oh.
opened it. It's a sealed context.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So this is now a historical artifact in its own right, because most of these obviously will have been eaten,
Consumed, yeah.
whatever.
No. Uh-huh.
Yeah, consumed. So we have here if people are doing forensic archaeology in 20, 50, 100 years time, we have a sealed Freddo treasure hunting crime scene available. I'll make
See,
sure this gets handed down through the
yeah,
family,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. Yeah,
You know,
bequeath it to grateful children.
that's
Yes.
it. But it may even end up in a museum as a museum of heritage crime,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um, or no, almost heritage crime, I should say,
Yeah, well, yeah.
because we've got no.
You also need to be careful with that as well. Andy Brockman featured prominently in Museum of Heritage Crime, but it's worthwhile saying as well, just that this Muppet of the Decade element also tied in with what we saw in other places as well. So Countryfile, BBC Countryfile did a guide that was very dangerously close to essentially advocating unstructured looting of the landscape. Um,
Yeah,
and of course, one of the trends of the year, of the decade rather, sorry, that we've identified is this growth in the subculture of metal detecting rallies. There is a big question mark, and maybe this is the question mark for this whole watching brief this month, over what it means to live in a country that is so rich in its heritage,
yeah,
and to negotiate the relationship between the population, who after all live in a free country,
yeah,
and that heritage and history, which does, at least I believe, belong to all of us. And that means that
indeed,
even though that means that anyone should have access to it, we
yeah,
all have we all have rights to know what it is, where it was found, and what it means.
yeah,
And that means that these are complicated issues, which Cadbury's just waded into like Augustus Gloop in Willy Wonka's
yeah.
factory. Yes.
They didn't have a Scooby what they were letting themselves in for. It was, but no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, these are difficult issues, and the issue of who owns our past,
Yeah.
who are the gatekeepers of our past. Those complicated, multifaceted issues are, and I know we're going to do our suggestions for, what to look out for in the next decade in a moment, just to
Yeah.
finish. But it's difficult, multifaceted conversations about this stuff, and what archaeology should be doing all the time. Unfortunately, the Fredo campaign showed we certainly up until now we haven't had a huge amount of success in breaking through to advertising and media professionals, certainly,
Mm.
who it should be second. If we've done our job properly as a sector over the years, it should be second nature to know that you don't just tell people to go out and dig holes on historic sites.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.